The air in the city felt heavy, thick with the kind of tension that precedes a summer storm. But this wasn't weather, it was history. For years, we had watched from our porches and through the shared stories of our neighbors as a rot grew in the south, a poison that didn't stay behind borders. They called it the Cartel of the Suns, a name that sounded too bright for something so dark. We knew it as the source of the white powder that stole our sons and the lawlessness that mocked our way of life. I stood on the corner of the block where the great stone courthouse rose like a fortress of old justice. There were no sirens, no humming engines of the city, just the rhythmic tramp of boots on pavement and the low, constant murmur of 1,000 voices gathered in the square. We were here to see the ghost made flesh. For a long time, he had been a face on a poster, a name whispered in warnings, a man who thought himself a king while he served as a kingpin. The news had reached us through the printed word and the spoken word, passed from hand to hand in the town squares and the meeting halls. The tyrant had been taken, not by some distant, invisible hand, but by the resolve of a nation that had finally said, no more. We weren't interested in the world's games or the endless talk of foreign committees. We cared about the fact that the man who had conspired to flood our streets with poison was finally standing on our soil to answer for it. He walked into that courtroom, not as a president, but as a prisoner. I wasn't inside, but the descriptions flowed out like water from a breached dam. He stood there with his wife, the two of them looking small against the weight of the law they had tried to outrun. They said he pleaded, "Not guilty." The audacity of it hung in the air. How do you plead not guilty to the tears of 1,000 mothers? How do you plead innocence when the trail of cocaine leads directly to the palace doors? To us, this wasn't just about Venezuela. It was about the principle of America first. It meant that our safety, our laws, and our borders were not suggestions to be negotiated away. If you target our people, if you use your power to subvert our peace, the long arm of American justice will eventually find you. It might take years, it might take a change in the winds of power, but the debt always comes due. The charges were a litany of betrayal, narco-terrorism, conspiracy, the arming of rebels to facilitate the flow of drugs. It was a business built on the graves of the innocent. And yet, there were those who whispered of instability and power vacuums. Let them whisper. We knew that a vacuum of tyranny is the only space where freedom can breathe. Back home, away from the stone walls of New York, the talk was different. In the fields and the workshops, men and women spoke of a renewed hope. For too long, it felt like the world's problems were being dumped on our doorstep while we were told to look the other way. Seeing Maduro in a Manhattan courtroom was a sign that the tide was turning. It was a message to every other strongman and every other cartel. Our patience has a limit, and our reach is absolute. I thought of the stories coming back from the South now. They spoke of a transition, of leaders like Gonzalez and Machado trying to stitch a broken country back together. We wished them well, but our focus remained here. We wanted to see the evidence. We wanted to see the Cartel of the Suns dismantled piece by piece. We wanted the assurance that the weapons he sent north would never again find a home in our neighborhoods. The security in the city was unlike anything I'd seen. Sentries stood at every corner, their eyes sharp, their presence a reminder that justice requires a shield. There were no flashing lights, only the steady gaze of men committed to their post. It felt like a return to an older, more serious era of our history, a time when right and wrong weren't blurred by the grey fog of globalist compromise. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the courthouse steps, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The trial would be long, the arguments would be complex. But the image of the man who thought he was untouchable, standing before an American judge, was already a victory. It was a victory for the rule of law over the rule of the gun. It was a victory for the sovereignty of our people. We don't seek to be the world's policemen, but we will always be the defenders of our own home. If the world learns a lesson from the fall of Maduro, let it be this: America is no longer content to manage the symptoms of global decay. We are going to the root. We are bringing the architects of our misery to the light of day. The transition in Venezuela would be their own burden to carry. We would watch, we would hope for their success, but our eyes would remain fixed on the scales of justice in that New York courtroom. For every life lost to the drugs he moved, for every family shattered by the violence he financed, this trial was a reckoning. Walking away from the square, the sound of the crowd faded into the quiet of the evening. The world felt a little smaller, a little more orderly. The America First path isn't about isolation, it's about clarity. It's about knowing who our enemies are and having the courage to hold them accountable on our terms. Maduro might have entered that building as a deposed leader, but he would leave it as a reminder that no one, no matter how high they climb on a ladder of corruption, is above the reach of a nation that puts its people first. The dawn was coming, and for the first time in a long time, the air felt clean.